So to me, I feel like religion, even though I think in a broader social sense is being more and more marginalized as people seem less and less engaged
Mm-hmm.
as a whole. Um, but there's a huge potential for religion to play a role in trying to help people become more self-sufficient or more family focused or more community focused. Um, so I grew up in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, most commonly referred to as Mormons. And one of the things that we've run up against, we homeschool our kids. And when you homeschool your kids, it's often very worthwhile to try to find other homeschoolers to do activities with. And
Sure.
so in many communities, especially communities that have larger homeschool populations, they form co-ops. And here, um, there's a co-op that is Christian based, and they expect you to not adhere, but it's not like swear an oath, but basically you have to say that you believe in these particular tenets in order to participate in the co-op.
Oh,
And
okay.
one of those tenets of many mainstream Christian faiths is the idea of the Trinity as being one being. And in Latter-day Saint theology, we believe that God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit are three separate beings,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so because we don't adhere to that Trinitarian ideal, we've been asked not to participate in some of these kinds of organizations. And to me, it's kind of a failure on the part of uh, people in their religious uh, practice, I guess is probably not exactly the word that I'm looking for, but in um, their expression of their faith, in
Yeah.
being exclusive for something that has the power to build community.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, we still have the opportunity to, the kids hang out with families that participate in these things, just we can't become a member because of not holding that Trinitarian
That's
view
so,
on the
gosh,
Godhead.
that is really
And
quite exacting. I mean, I think there are a lot of different Christian positions on the exact relationship of the three persons.
right, right.
Yeah. So,
But I mean, I think that's an example though of what we see across the board is that there are certain dogmas that are so cherished or so, I don't want to denigrate it in this way, but that are just so blindly held that they keep people from actually exercising the faith that they profess.
mhm.
And that's not exclusive to any particular sect or location or anything like that. I think that's very broadly and uniformly the case that people tend to uh, become dogmatic, right? That was what I was talking about at the beginning about political dogmatism. It's the same thing in religion. It's even the same thing in secularism. And I think that that is a sad state of things because we could do so much more with our faiths, with our religious social circles, and expanding them to include people who don't necessarily believe what we believe, but could benefit from our friendship, from our association, from the things that we can bring to a relationship. And, you know, as a Christian, it seems very unchristian to not be so inclusive.
Yeah.
It's petty almost. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I have to agree. I think you kind of just spotlighted a problem with community that it's always this balancing act because you have to have some convictions that are held, with some strength for the people to be motivated to stay together. But you almost always get dogmatists out of that, in any given group, there's going to be a certain number of them that just sort of naturally move into that more puritanical space. And then they
right.
begin to kind of just, basically block any sort of outreach or any sort of like connections with others. And I don't know how you get around that. That seems to
Yeah.
be a dynamic of community that it's maybe this is where you have to plan enough to have some sort of local constitution.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well, and I don't think that's a bad idea.
yeah, like
I think it,
not anarchist, but
right,
having some liberal framework of certain,
right,
maybe liberal's the wrong word, but yeah, constitutional framework.
right. Well, and I think the constitutional idea is a good one, and it seems to have had a lot of use outside of America, right? Our Constitution's been a model for plenty of other places.
Mhm.
Um, and ours was even modeled on other documents that preceded it. I think the problem, we've circled back to uh, politics, which I kind of like.
That's just me too.
So I think that, if I was to approach this idea of how do we make distributism feasible and how do we make society more sane, I guess is the word that I'm thinking of, is I feel like we need to decentralize power a lot more because, first of all, we don't live our lives on the federal level unless you consider the fact that there's a McDonald's on every street corner in every state, in every city. And, I guess in that regard, we do live a national life because we shop at national chains. But the reality is that I'm not going to vote for anybody running for Congress or state legislatures in New Jersey. So why should I have any say over what happens in New Jersey? I think that at the time that our country was founded, it was a very different dynamic. Everybody lived on the Eastern Seaboard. Everybody was much more apt to consider themselves to associate with the state that they lived in rather than with any sort of a federal level of anything,
Mhm.
aside from the Tories that were still Brits, right, in their minds. And now we've evolved into this society where it's like, no, we're Americans, or as some people like to say, Americans.
Yeah.
And I don't think that there's a whole lot of value in our day-to-day lives with that conception being primary, simply because when you ask them, well, what does it mean to be American? Uh, you know, not too many people are going to give you a very good answer, right?
Right.
I don't think most people have thought about what it means to be an American other than freedom. And I joke with my family, we've gotten
Never
into
that.
investing in cryptocurrencies, and
Mm.
we can't even buy the cryptocurrencies that we want legally because the exchanges that they're sold on block US citizens because the SEC has such high demands. And I'm like, is this freedom? I mean, is it freedom when you have to ask permission to put a new outlet in your wall? Or, what is freedom when you have to ask permission for everything and most things aren't actually legal? And,
It's an odd way of thinking, isn't it?
and
They're not putting those things together at all. I think
right,
you're right. It's a very shallow understanding, and it amounts to maybe kind of freedom to do what I want to do in the moment, given the parameters I'm living in.
right.
It's kind of
Uh,
sad.
Unfortunately, I liken it almost to a form of Stockholm syndrome, right? We've grown up with, it's not exactly that way, right? Because uh, it did actually used to, I think, represent more real liberty and more real freedom.
Mm.
Um, but I think as the country has grown, as there's been more and more people added to it and more geography added to the country, the efficacy, I think, of the original founding ideals have become so watered down simply because you can't possibly have any kind of meaningful governance of that many people from so far away unless it's going to be a much more authoritarian style of governance,
Mm.
because you can't possibly understand all of the issues across all of these communities, across all of these religious backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds, geographic constraints, and all of these other things. So to me, and where I'm at now, I just feel like we'd probably be a lot better served and better governed and more likely to find, or at least not feel as stressed over the political situation in this country if we were to take the federal constitution and relegate it to just things like national defense. And I don't know that I'd go much farther than that and take everything else that the
Maybe
federal
something
government.
like the Bill of Rights, in other words, individual rights.
I don't even know if I'd go that far, simply because there are so many different interpretations of certain rights that are in there that differ from place to place. Um, and without the ability for a population that is much more homogenous, at least in their geography, if not their other interests, um, again, I go back to the idea of, I know nothing about what happens in New Jersey. Why should I vote on anything that they're doing there? It just doesn't make any sense from a practical standpoint, unless I feel so strongly about my particular views in life that I want to impose that on them. And so to me, like, I think the international community has come up with enough of Declaration of Human Rights, and most civilized countries adhere to many, if not most of those, that I
Mhm.
don't know that it needs to be as uniform and rigid across the geography that we currently inhabit. I think that if we were to decentralize the remainder of the federal government's current uh, sphere of influence to the states, at least that would be more appropriate and more efficient. Efficient's not exactly the right word. Uh, More effective governance if it was devolved to the state level. And honestly, I think that most of those issues could even be passed down to the county level and be much more uh, flexible. And uh, I think we'd have a lot less of the polarization that we would see, because it is reflective of that community's values and whatnot. It wouldn't feel, I mean, if that were the case, you could have Kansas not feeling like all of these, I'm going to use pejoratives here, but these liberal nut jobs in California telling us how to live our lives.
Mhm.
I see a lot of my left-leaning friends on Facebook and other places post about, oh, it's time to get rid of the electoral college. It's a an antiquated system that just doesn't fit. And really, what they're saying is, we want to impose our will on the rural parts of the country. And there's no reason that they should be telling us how to live our lives, which I agree with. But the flip side of that is, there's no reason that they should be telling us how to live our lives, being in a more rural place.
I
Um,
think you'd get this big sort of like parting of the ways over time if you had a system like that, which maybe would be okay. But in other words, anybody in the Midwest that didn't sort of agree with that basic uh, way of thinking would probably leave and go to someplace else where they did, and vice versa. So
right.
eventually you'd have, areas of the country that are even more starkly politically different than they are now.
I,
And
I agree with that. I also think we would see maybe more nuance across the board. It wouldn't be so right, left, red, blue, Democrat, Republican. We might actually see some other ideologies come out that could be workable,
maybe
or not.
polarization wouldn't happen as much, since they wouldn't be directly aimed at each other. They would
Right.
be separating their power.
But I also don't think that we would see a complete dissolution of the union so much, simply because those highly populated areas can't feed themselves. I
Mm.
mean, there has, and the less populated areas are going to have a whole lot harder time clothing themselves, right? We may be able to grow the cotton, but unless we want to go put mills back everywhere, which might actually be a good idea, um, the middle of the country needs a lot of those manufactured goods that they're not producing. And so I don't think that we're going to see a complete, I don't think that they would lead to a complete dissolution, and even a contentious uh, sort of situation, at least not any more contentious than it is right now. And so when I see those memes, I actually think to myself, I think that's a great idea. Let's get rid of the electoral college, because what's going to happen is all of the small, low population states are going to push for secession or something, because now all of a sudden their votes are meaningless.
All right.
I mean, that's the decentralist in me right now, is maybe we should see what happens when you want to do that, because it's going to throw things into upheaval in ways that I don't think you're thinking about.
I could write like 3 dystopian novels right now. I've got like
Right.
3 different ideas.
Yeah.
Well,
I think my mind usually just kind of is constantly circulating all sorts of dystopian novels based on some of these things. But the sad thing is I think we're living in a bit of a dystopian novel right now, insofar as we've become so disconnected from the necessities of life, instead of thinking of food, clothing, shelter, comfort, like socialization, not socialization, but association with other human beings. Instead, we think that the necessity is, I need a paycheck. I need to pay my mortgage. And these things in the current paradigm are necessary, but they're not necessities, right? They're not going to ensure our survival
yeah.
as beings. They're going to ensure our economic survival in a system that is so disconnected from reality, or at least from the biological and ecological reality, that it's literally committing suicide, like you were talking about.
Yeah, it's tragic. And, looking at it from the outside, it just is, it's absolutely insane.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any point of, from the point of view of survival, it makes no sense, right? From the point of view of happiness, it
Right.
makes sense. Health, I mean,
Right.
what are we doing all this for? Well, we've gotten caught up in the treadmill that we don't think we can get off. And
Right.
so I guess we probably ought to wrap it up, but I think that kind of what unifies this discussion is that question of how could we possibly get from here to there? How can people have that kind of imagination? And at what level would they need to kind of strive for it? And I think the whole discussion kind of revolves around that topic of possibilities. So it's been a good one. And I don't know if do you have any parting thoughts or last thoughts that you didn't get in that you want to?
It's always kind of entertaining to just kind of spitball how things might go, or how to address some of these bigger issues, which I'll be the first to say I don't have the answers. I have lots of opinions. I have some of them I hold maybe more strongly than others. Some of them I will argue against them with somebody, just so that I can see, maybe where the holes are on them and develop them better. And so I think it's going to take a lot of conversations like this, where we talk about, even if somebody's on the opposite side of any spectrum, to sit there and say, here's the problems as I see it, and here's what I think might be a solution. And most of those kinds of conversations don't happen enough. For one, because people won't get together in a setting where they can have that conversation. And so I think that if we're ever going to move something forward, there needs to be more conversation, and there needs to be more conversation that's face to face, and there needs to be more which is funny saying this into my computer screen, but we've had conversations face to face. But there needs to be more of that. There needs to be more of an openness to empathizing with other people's viewpoints on things. It's like, I believe that we are too big of a country to govern from Washington, D.C. But I'm not right. That's just my opinion. And I'll defend it, or I'll extrapolate on it, or whatever. But I'm not right. Like, I don't have the answer. I have ideas. I think my ideas are better than others that are currently out there, but I'm not right. And I'm not ever going to be right, because the right answer for governance, or the right answer for an economic system, or the right answer for even religious understanding and faith is going to come from constantly evolving that opinion and that understanding based upon other people's thoughts and ideas and experiences. And I think we've lost that. It's like,
Yeah.
we need to have the answer, and my answer is the best answer because it's my answer. And that seems to be the dominant mode of conversation about any of these things. You're wrong because you disagree with me, and so you're a bad person. And that
Yeah.
seems to be how it comes across online. And I think that that's just sad.
It is. It's sad. It's getting in the way of intellectual development. It's boring, among other things. And you never know when it's going to happen to you or somebody, because
Right.
sometimes it's you step on a landmine that you didn't even see there. And
Right.
so
But new
yeah,
landmines are getting set that pop
that you
up
don't even
under
know.
each step. Right. Yeah.
Right,
You
right.
never know what's going to come back. Right. I said something here, I'm sure that 5 years from now will be used against me, if not in a court of public opinion, in a court of law,
Probably.
simply because this is the way that the world works these days.
Yeah, yeah. And you can't even start the conversation about building community and being more self-sufficient if you can't have open conversations in which people can differ without trying to cut each other off or destroy each other.
Right.
Which is it's a liberal principle, but but it's
Mhm.
also like ideal these days. Like you can't even imagine it happening. I got to wrap my head around that, but it has become just, yeah, almost impossible to imagine. I know
Yeah.
this is just one period of time though, and things change. And I sort of say to myself, nothing lasts forever,
Right.
but it's not a
Well, the
good time to
unfortunate
be a person who is into politics.
the unfortunate thing is that these periods of time tend to transition in ugly ways. And it would be really nice to be able to find the transition from this time to whatever the next epoch is going to bring, without it being, a world war or a civil war or things like that. And unfortunately, it just seems like that's where the change comes from. And, when I hear things like, let's get rid of the electoral college or the Senate, it's one I've seen a lot lately. The Senate and the Electoral College. Those things are things that are going to push people into defending their ideologies in ways that are not good,
No, not
and that worries me. I mean, not to the point that I'm losing sleep, but enough that, if something like that were to happen and we transition to the next epoch, uh, I worry for my kids and
I do
my
too.
neighbors and things like that. It's sad that humans have to have that kind of wake up call to come back into some sort of civility.
Yep. I worry about that for my son, both the political stuff and also the environmental stuff. Like
Yeah,
the future of our young people is really in peril. And we do have a responsibility to fix some of this, or at least try, before we hand it all off to them.
yeah,
And, like if it's a first step is actually being able to deal with other people, like that's how far it's
right.
gone, is to be able to talk to other people. Then that's where we should start. So I'm glad we've had this conversation,
Yeah,
and
me too.
yeah, thank you very much.